Go ahead, pull up a chair. The fire's warm tonight, and there's no rush. You know, I was sitting here a while ago watching these flames, and it got me thinking about how different things used to be. Back when you didn't have the whole world in your pocket. When kids stayed outside until the streetlights came on, and when getting to know someone meant looking them in the eye instead of a screen. Tonight, I thought I'd tell you a little about those days, the good old ones, and what they felt like back then. When you sit still long enough, memories start lining up on their own. You don't chase them. They just show up. And the first thing that usually comes back to me is how quiet the world felt before everything was connected all the time, before answers were instant, and before we carried the whole world around in our pockets. Back then, time moved a little differently. Not slower exactly, just quieter. If you wanted to know something, you couldn't just pull it out of thin air. You had to ask someone, or wait, or figure it out the long way. If the phone rang, you answered it without knowing who it was. And if it didn't ring, you simply went on with your day. We didn't carry clocks in our pockets. We felt time instead. The sun told us when it was late. Hunger told us when it was dinner. And boredom told us it was time to go find something to do. Funny thing about boredom, we were scared of it back then too. But we didn't know how to escape it, so we learned how to sit with it. And sitting with it usually meant going outside. You'd step out the front door and the world felt bigger, not louder, just bigger. Streets stretched on forever, and yards felt like open fields. Every corner of the neighborhood held the promise of something happening, even if you didn't know what yet. There were no group chats to organize things, no notifications telling you where everyone was. You just rode your bike until you found someone you knew. Sometimes you did, sometimes you didn't, and either way, you made something out of it. I remember days where the only plan was, I'll be back before dark. And somehow, that was enough. You learned how to read the sky back then. When the light started turning orange, you knew you'd pushed it. When the street lights flickered on, that was your warning shot. We didn't think of it as freedom. It was just life. And the funny thing is, nobody told us those would be the good old days. You never know you're in them while they're happening. It's only later, years later, when you find yourself sitting quietly, watching a fire like this, that it all comes back to you. The waiting, the wandering, the not knowing what came next, and being okay with that. We didn't think much about it back then. It was simply the way things were. And when you didn't know what to do next, when boredom finally caught up with you, you did the simplest thing imaginable. You went outside. When I think back on it now, most of my childhood memories don't take place indoors. They live outside, under open skies, in the kind of spaces that felt enormous when you were young. Going outside wasn't something you planned or scheduled. It was simply what you did. After breakfast, after school, after whatever chores needed doing, you grabbed your jacket or your bike and stepped out the front door. And that was the day beginning. The neighborhood became your world. Every driveway felt like a starting line, every empty lot an adventure waiting to be named. Trees weren't just trees. They were forts, lookout points, or secret places where plans were made and forgotten just as quickly. And bikes were freedom in its purest form. You could ride for hours without any real destination, letting curiosity decide which streets you took and how far you went. Parents didn't track you, and they didn't hover. They trusted you, not because you were extraordinary, but because that was simply how things worked. You learned your limits on your own, sometimes the easy way, and sometimes the hard one. You learned how fast was too fast, how high was a little too high, and how far was just far enough that getting home felt like an accomplishment. And when you crossed those lines, there were consequences. Scraped knees, bruised elbows, dirt under your fingernails that didn't come out right away. But no one panicked. You wiped it off, laughed it off, or cried for a minute before getting back up and rejoining the game. We didn't have words like resilience or grit. We just called it continuing on. Every group of kids had its own unspoken rules, rules that made perfect sense to us and none at all to anyone else. Which yards were off limits, which streets you weren't supposed to cross, which risks were acceptable, and which ones earned you a lecture. Arguments happened, feelings got hurt, and someone always stormed off. But they never stayed gone long. There wasn't anywhere else to be. Summer days felt endless. Time wasn't measured in minutes or hours, but in shadows and light, in how low the sun had dipped and how much longer you could stretch the day before it was time to head home. When the streetlights flickered on, you didn't argue with them. You turned back, dusty and tired, replaying the day in your head as you walked. Dinner tasted better when you'd earned it, and sleep came easily at night. Not because you were bored, but because you were satisfied in a way that only comes from moving your body, using your imagination, and feeling like the day was fully lived. Looking back now, those hours outside taught us more than we realized at the time. They taught us how to solve problems without instructions, how to read people, how to lose and win and keep going either way. Somewhere in the middle of all that wandering, you started noticing other things too, like the way your heart sped up around certain people and how a simple conversation could suddenly feel important. Those days outside had a way of shaping you without asking permission. Somewhere between scraped knees and long summer evenings, you started to notice that the world wasn't just wide. It was personal. Certain people stood out, and certain moments lingered a little longer than the rest. And that was usually how something new began. Dating back then didn't begin with a swipe or a message. It began quietly, often without much warning. A glance held a second too long, a feeling you didn't quite have a name for yet. You noticed someone the way you noticed a song on the radio, almost by accident at first, until you realized you were paying attention. There were no profiles to study and no pictures to scroll through. You had to figure things out the old way, by watching how someone carried themselves, how they laughed, and how they spoke to others when they didn't think anyone important was listening. And when you finally decided to do something about it, that decision took courage. You had to ask them out the only way you knew how. Out loud, in person, with your heart pounding a little harder than you wanted it to. There were no drafts or second chances, just that moment where you chose to be brave and see what happened. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. When it didn't, it stung for a while, but the feeling stayed where it happened. It didn't follow you home or replay itself endlessly. You felt it, learned from it, and eventually moved on. First dates were simple: a walk, a drive with the windows down, sharing a milkshake because neither of you wanted to admit how nervous you were. You talked, really talked, because there was nothing else competing for your attention. Silence didn't feel awkward back then. It told you things if you were willing to sit with it long enough. Love didn't need to announce itself. It moved slowly, built out of small moments and shared experiences, settling in before you even realized what was happening. When things became serious, you knew it. Effort showed. Plans were made and kept. You didn't wonder where you stood. You felt it. And when it ended, if it ended, heartbreak had room to breathe. Time softened the sharp edges the way it always has. Looking back now, it wasn't that dating was easier. It was that it asked more of you. Fewer options, maybe, but more intention. Less distraction, more presence. Those experiences stayed with you, not because they were perfect, but because they were real. They shaped how you learned to care for another person, one conversation at a time, long before you ever realized what they were teaching you. It's strange how those memories surface so easily, not because they were extraordinary, but because they were lived honestly, without much thought of preserving them. And when you sit with that long enough, it starts to feel like the fire itself is reminding you of something. I suppose every generation has its own version of the good old days. Different details, different tools, different worries. But the feeling underneath stays the same: being present, not knowing what comes next, and trusting that it'll be all right. Back then, we didn't talk about mindfulness or balance. We didn't have words for any of it. We just lived. We made mistakes out loud, learned slowly, and carried fewer things while somehow feeling fuller for it. I don't say any of this to pretend the past was perfect. It wasn't. But there were pieces of it worth remembering. The patience, the courage to speak instead of type, and the way silence didn't need to be filled. Time keeps moving. Faster now, maybe. Louder, too. But nights like this, with a fire burning low and nothing demanding your attention, remind you that some things don't need to be updated. They just need to be remembered. So if tonight brought back a memory or made you smile at something you hadn't thought about in a while, that's enough. You don't have to hold on to it or chase it. Just let it sit with you for a moment. The fire will burn down on its own. The night will stay quiet. And tomorrow will come when it's ready. For now, just enjoy the warmth.